Hey, everybody, welcome. We're going to do the Reluctant Healer Week
Oh dear.
and actually talk you through one of my all-time favorite stories. I often say the way to get a beautiful woman to fall in love with you is do something nice
So what you're doing is
for
teaching people.
someone they love.
So what you're doing is teaching people how to manipulate.
We're all manipulative. Why do people not get this? Everybody is manipulative. It's just the more sophisticated you are, the harder it is to tell.
Oh, I see.
And when I met you, it's like, oh my goodness, that was so like a shot of cocaine. Not that I've actually ever done cocaine, but it was, my little heart went fast. I'm like, whoa, beautiful and smart. I'm a sucker for that. And then, a couple weeks later, I scanned you because that's
true.
sort of the lore in my family. Is
The naked brain.
date one of my children, or if I told myself if I was ever going to get married again, the first naked part of her was her brain I wanted to see. And you had not only a beautiful brain, but you are beautiful and you're smart. And then a couple of months after we knew each other, you got a call from your sisters about your father. But before we tell the story, why don't you read a review?
So this is Healing from TBI by Whitney Mack podcast site. This is from our podcast site. Laughing my way out of a head injury. I've been listening to Dr. Amen and Tana. They have changed my life. Diet and supplements, both from their lists and company, literally are lifesavers. So if you can laugh your way out of a TBI, that's pretty awesome. That made me happy to read.
Well, most people don't know that if you've had a traumatic brain injury, you should do something about it. You should put your brain in a healing environment because, as we've seen here at Amen Clinics over and over and over, you are not stuck with the brain you have. You can make it better. You just have to put it in a healing environment. And so the story starts, goodness, more than 13 years ago.
The story starts when I was 2 months old.
Well, I wasn't there then, so you're going to have to tell this part.
Well, the story actually starts when I was a baby because I really don't have a relationship with I didn't have a relationship with my dad. My dad left. So my parents got divorced and my dad decided to check out. So rather than at least making an effort to see me, he just was gone. He was partying, he started doing drugs, and then he cleaned up and became a minister. But even as a minister, he was not involved in my life. And then when he was involved in my life, it was sporadic. It was for a couple weeks a year. And even when I would see him, he was far too busy to actually spend time with me. So my stepmom would spend more time with me than my dad did. And he was just very sort of harsh. So we were never close. And then things got really weird when he divorced my stepmom and he started partying with my sisters. Minister gone wild. He went back to his old ways and I don't know, he just went off sort of the deep end, starts partying with my sister. So he goes from being this very rigid, very sort of hellfire and brimstone minister to now all of that just went out the window. And it really threw me for a loop. And so I made it very clear to him, I never wanted to talk to him again. I was done. I just didn't understand him.
That was when you were 18.
And I was just completely finished. I never wanted to talk to him, never wanted to see him again. And then after I got cancer, I sort of set that aside. I just let it go. I wasn't mad at him anymore. I just didn't have a relationship with him. So didn't really see him. I'd seen him a couple times over from the time I was 25 to when I was dating you. I'd seen him maybe a couple times. But no relationship really to speak of.
It reminds me of the documentary we saw this weekend, which is, what was the name of it? 3 Identical Strangers. Mm-hmm. About these triplets that were separated at birth and raised in different families. But what nobody told the kids was they were part of a study.
Right.
And one of them later went on to develop a mental illness. bipolar disorder and killed himself. And when they looked at the differences, it came out to be parenting. At least that was the implication. And the one parent that was more rule bound and harsher, even though genetically these three men are the same, one develops real trouble.
Right.
So parents really do matter.
Yeah, your environment matters.
And it may almost have been better that he wasn't involved in your life day in and day out, because
He was
the
totally erratic.
criticism and the negativity was just bad for
Well, and he
people.
wasn't a solid person.
Right.
And I'm giving you the Reader's Digest version of what happened. I mean, it was a lot more involved and complicated than that.
So then we start dating 13 more years ago now, and you get a call that he has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, that he's renting a room, but he's not coming out of his room, and your sisters have no idea what to do.
Yeah, they need my help. He won't come out of his room. He's a recluse. He's not taking care of himself. He's not showering, regularly, and they're just really worried. And my first reaction was, "It's not my problem." Like, it's just flat out not my problem. Why is this my problem? He's never been a part of my life. So why are you calling me? I was at that time a single mother. Working really hard. This was just not something I was ready or willing to take on. So, this is someone who I didn't have a lot of fondness for. So
Yes,
I didn't really have a lot of anger anymore. I just didn't have, there was like nothing. So why is this my problem?
And unfortunately, or fortunately, you were dating someone who, when I hear stories like that, I'm like, let's see, he's diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Has anybody looked at his brain? No. They're just medicating him in the dark, and he's actually on a fairly odd combination of medication.
And let's back up. The only reason I even talked to you about it was so you could give me a solution for them, not for me. I was looking for a way to help them take care of him.
So you brought it up. Let's just be clear.
Yeah, but not so that you could bring him down and move him in with me.
Well, that's not what happened.
That is what happened.
No.
That is what
happened initially was I said, why don't you let me see him? See,
That's your sneaky way of let me move him in with us.
No, I didn't want
Yeah, you're going
to
to
do
see.
that.
Over time, that's what happens a lot.
Well, I think God puts us on the planet to be useful, to be helpful.
I think he put you and me on the planet for two different reasons, but okay. But one would ask,
Well,
why did I marry
Why
a
did
psychiatrist?
God put you on the planet?
Well, yes, to be useful in a lot of ways, but I'm not sure my way is supposed to be the same as your way. I'm a protector, and it's so crazy but why did someone who learned to build walls and keep people in my family who literally created massive amounts of chaos, just keep them out of my life? Why would I marry somebody who then just decides, oh no, we need to fix them all and move them in and keep them near us and bring them all back?
Has the therapy helped you answer that question?
No.
So to continue the story, he's diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. He's a recluse. We bring him down, not to move him in, but we bring him down so that I can assess him, because how do you really know what's going on in somebody's brain unless you actually look? All of you have heard me say that over and over again. And there are over 2,000 studies on dementia and Alzheimer's disease. SPECT is one of the best studies to look at it. It's actually used for dementia around the world. And, here at Amen Clinics, we have more experience than anybody ever. And so when we brought him down, so I got to meet your dad. I thought that was important, dating you. In fact, for those of you that are dating, you should get my book, Brain and Love, because chapter 6 actually tells you how to do a neuroscience assessment of your potential partner's family. So I've actually been thinking about this for a long time.
Oh, I warned you way in advance. I held nothing back.
Yes, that you come from crazy.
Yeah. So I held. There's full disclosure.
And so when we brought him down and I scanned him, he did not have Alzheimer's disease. He did not have the Alzheimer's pattern in his brain that's actually been
shocked.
described for the last 30 years. So he's misdiagnosed, mistreated. And
he's on the wrong medications, like weird medications.
He's on the wrong medications. And now at this point, I really do think he should stay close so that we can fix his brain.
Told you.
He had something called pseudo dementia, which I've diagnosed many times. It's people who are diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease or other forms of dementia, but their brain doesn't show it. Their brain actually shows they're depressed. And so that's what pseudo dementia is, which is depression that's masquerading as severe cognitive and memory problems. And I took him off his medications, put him on some supplements, and when we come back, we're going to tell you the sort of really interesting turn this story took.
Welcome back. We are talking about reluctant healers in these episodes this week, and we're talking about the story of my dad and my husband, who tends to bring people back into my life.
So we've been talking about how he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, and he was a recluse and not coming out of his room, and your sisters were freaked out, and they call you, and you're like, why is this my problem? This is a guy that's not been part of my life in a good way. He's actually brought more pain in my life than anything.
Right.
And when I scan him, he does not have Alzheimer's disease. He has something called pseudo dementia. So now we're going to get to the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. But first, Hannah Raoul writes in, thank you very much for sharing this podcast. I appreciate so much both of your expertise in the fields, the complementarity of your couple, the willingness to share your passions. Always a great pleasure to watch your exchange, no matter what the topic. It makes me feel great and fun about relationships and myself. It points out how much should be still done in expanding the knowledge and technologies, access to nuclear medicine and scans and care. You make me feel real progress in love.
Aw.
Hannah, thank you so much. We adore each other, which is why we've done 412 podcasts. We haven't killed each other.
You're my best friend.
And I'm staying that way. You're not getting rid of me.
Till death do us part.
That's it. And we're trying to keep you alive as we try to keep ourselves alive. And so, not the rest of the story with David, but the next part of the story is he does not have Alzheimer's disease, yet he's being treated for it. He's depressed. So obviously, if you're depressed, being in a room all by yourself is going to accelerate the illness. It's not going to decelerate it. And I couldn't think of someone better for him to be around than his daughter, who
why you had that
was
thought
a reluctant
was just
healer.
completely beyond me.
But I was witness to him being better. And actually, he's quite a bright man who'd been involved in teaching seminars on the DISC, which is personality inventory. He'd done it for businesses and done it for couples. I had him actually do it for our business. And I realized how smart he was. And as he began to get better through socialization, learning not to believe every stupid thing he thought, omega-3 fatty acids, SAMe, which is a supplement that's been shown to
So you took
support
wait. You took him off of the medications he was on. You put him on the correct medications.
Well, it was mostly the correct supplements.
Okay.
That really helped.
Oh, and the interesting thing is, he was convinced his entire life that he had ADD. So that was a really fascinating discovery. He didn't have ADD. Now, my mom, who didn't believe in ADD, had ADD from hell. So that was really kind of fascinating.
Uncle.
My mom's ADD was terrible. My dad was convinced he had ADD.
So now you've just shared with everybody, not only did I scan you, I scanned your dad, I scanned your mom, I scanned your
You've
uncle.
scanned my entire family.
Just
pretty much.
about.
So, yeah, it was really fascinating, though. So my mom just believes you need to work harder, and just stick with it. My dad couldn't really stick with stuff very well, and so he believed he had ADD, and he didn't.
He did not. In fact, depression ran throughout his whole family. Mm-hmm. There was significant issues with his mother and other people in the family. And so as his depression got better through working in our 4 circles approach, right, we always talk about, so what's the biology, that's why the supplements support it, the psychology, learning not to believe every stupid thing you think, the social circle, which is then getting reconnected with
For him,
his
it was
daughter.
church and me and church.
And then church, which is social and spiritual. And then he began to develop a sense, once again, of meaning and purpose.
Yeah,
and so over 4, 5, 6 months, we really saw this closed flower open.
So we should really sort of lay this out for people. So obviously moving someone in with me who I did not have a relationship with did not just it wasn't just all of a sudden this magic thing just happened and it was all rosy. No, it didn't. That was not what happened. It was weird and it was rough at first. So I found myself staying away from home. I didn't like it. I didn't like having him in my house. He was getting better. I was annoyed. It was just like, why am I doing this? But at some point, I actually got some therapy over it. And I think through my process of getting therapy, I learned to let it go. I dealt with my own stuff with it. So EMDR really helped. And so I really learned how to let it go for real, like finally let it go. And I was able to talk to him. What's really interesting is I actually did let it go. I had no idea how much guilt he was holding on to. He couldn't let it go. He could not let the past go. And that was actually more painful to watch. That was really painful to see this man not be able to let the past go and to just sort of beat himself up. And so I had never seen that. I had always just seen this very sort of arrogant, proud facade that he had. That's all I ever knew of him. So now when he let that go and he's in my house, I'm watching the other side of that. And it was actually he really just didn't like himself for the past. And he could not forgive himself, which I thought was fascinating for a man who was sort of a man of God. And so it was really sort of an interesting thing. And I kept saying to him, why are you still holding on to it? I'm not holding on to it. Why are you holding on to it? So I'm confused. What's this about? And it really wasn't until he died that he was able to let it go.
You're like way ahead of the story.
Okay.
Let's not
but I had to talk about how hard
get
it
to
was.
death yet.
Okay, but we had
It's
to talk about
coming.
how hard it was.
But it's coming in a beautiful way, I promise you. So, yes, things just don't go away.
No.
That you have to work through them.
And you have to do your part.
But you have to work through it. And this is the point. If your brain's not right, it's really hard to work through past emotional pain.
Hardware, software.
You got to get the hardware right. And then the software can kick in.
And for me, it was more a software issue at that point. So I was not having very positive thoughts because I had a lot of the past that I was holding on to.
All right. But as we start to nurture his brain and your relationship begins to get better, what happens?
Well, like I said, I let the past. A big part of it was me letting the past go. So as I start to let the past go, I start being able to focus more on who he is now. And so what I started to notice was he started to get really healthy. He lost 20 pounds. He's walking. I lived right across the street from a church, one of the big churches in our area, which he got connected to and loved. All of a sudden, I come home one day and he's got men's Bible study going on in my house. I'm like, oh, he's back. But this time I felt a very different person emerging. I didn't feel like he was doing this at this stage in his life for any type of reward or facade from his family, which is what I had always felt before. This time I really felt this sincerity coming from him, like it was something he was doing because it was his connection, because it was something he loved. And so it was very different. He was connecting. And it was a young group that he was teaching because he was sort of their mentor. And they loved him. Like they looked up to him and they needed him. So it was very interesting to see. So I started to see him in a different light.
And then about 6 months after I first met him, he went to the church and did an all-day
7
seminar
hours.
teaching.
Yeah. This is a guy who couldn't come out of his room. Yeah.
So it was miraculous.
Yeah.
So we had the sense things were going in a better direction. And in the next episode, we're going to talk about how your relationship with him gets healed. Stay with us. Welcome back to The Reluctant Healer. And, I love sharing this story. It was a very important part of our sort of relationship history. And, sort of one of the first relationships we tackled together. And it was very important.
So one of the things I think that was important for me, we're talking about my dad, but we're also talking about a new relationship starting between us. And there was some annoyance. I was annoyed my dad was moving in with me. There was all this stuff going on with me and my dad. But when you're talking about getting together with someone and starting a relationship and starting a life with them, it's also important to step back and see what that person is like. And even though I was fairly annoyed with you for bringing him down here, it told me a lot about you and your view on family. And that was actually really important. So I might have been annoyed about that specific situation, but I realized something, that you don't back down when family is in trouble. You don't back down when there's a challenge. And for me, as somebody who had a little girl, that was really important. So I realized family was really important to you. Sometimes those relationships were more critical for you to dig into and want to heal than they were for me, because there were things that I had pushed, not just pushed out, but I was clear. They had been so toxic that I didn't want them in. And you were like, no, let's do this. And it was a love-hate thing.
Well, and sometimes people are so toxic that you need to push them out. So I'm not, even though I've been accused of being Pollyanna-ish, although Pollyanna is my favorite movie.
Yeah, he is.
I know there's a reality that you become like the people you spend time with. But often people eliminate people from their lives or ban people from their lives, and nobody knows, well, it could be their brain.
Right.
And if you don't look, how would you ever know? And once you balance their brain, often, not always, but often their relationships are better. They have more empathy, more forethought, better judgment, better impulse control, all of those things that going into making us who we are. And so he teaches an all-day seminar at church, and we're sort of feeling good about ourselves that he is progressing, and we really like that. And I think it's at that point I begin to meet your sisters. That was yet another part to the story. We'll tell that
Another
story
time.
another
That's another,
time.
yeah, that's a whole nother thing.
But you begin to think about how do all these brains interact with each other. And no family therapist I know outside of the ones here at Amen Clinics, and a couple of my friends like Dr. Hensland, Earl Hensland, who's in Brea, Southern California, they just never think about the brain as it relates to relationships.
Right.
And so now, in the beginning of our relationship, we actually begin to put the brain in the center of it. Scan you, scan your dad, then I scan your mom and your uncle who are working together. They both have terrible ADD. Balancing their ADD, they stop fighting with each other. Your mom just recently sold her business. When you balance the brain, people can get along better. And then a couple of years later, your dad actually gets sick with a medical illness.
Yeah, it was. So it's interesting. So he's doing so well, and like I said before, it didn't just all get better, right? We had to work. I mean, there was a lot of work that went into the relationship getting better, and so there were ups and downs, and there were some weird things about you don't just like blend your life with someone after 36 or 37 years, and all of a sudden it's just all better. So we were working on a lot of stuff and letting a lot of stuff go. And he was doing so much better, though, physically. His health was so much better. And all of a sudden, he was diagnosed with leukemia, a form of leukemia. And it was pretty crazy. He had to start going through chemo. And so now he's sick again. But it wasn't Alzheimer's disease, right? I mean, it was something completely unrelated, completely different. And so he got pretty sick. And through that process, one thing I did notice through that process is it affected his brain again. So, when he would not feel well, when he would go through chemo, when his blood count was low, when his hemoglobin was low, stuff like that he would slip back into some of his old behaviors. And fortunately, it was actually you that pointed it out to me. I would get so irritated. And you're like, wait a second. He's not actually getting oxygen to his brain. So that would actually be helpful because I could step back and go, oh, that's true. So it's the nurse in me could put that together. The biological thing I could actually deal with. The just sort of being a jerk thing, not so easy to deal with, right? So
Although they may be closely related.
well, that's what I mean. I could deal with that. So, because I can remember being in the hospital and people getting ICU psychosis and people having reactions to medications. That I can deal with all day long. So when I would hear that, it was easy. It was easier. And so when he finally got this progressed pretty bad, it was pretty bad, and he couldn't live. He actually for a while was living independently again. So that was pretty wild. He wanted to live.
While.
Yeah, for a couple of years he lived independently again, which was he wanted to, which was interesting. So we had to move him back in with us, and he was living in one of our bedrooms downstairs because he couldn't climb stairs. And eventually we had to have hospice come. And it was so interesting because I remember having such a hard time. I started to get physical manifestations and I didn't know why. I never get headaches, like ever. I was having these massive headaches and I felt sort of nauseous. I was not feeling well at all. And I couldn't figure it out. And I was getting these like very anxious, not mad at him, just like anxious feelings when he would moan and he was going through certain physical issues, and I could not figure it out. And I got to tell you, hospice nurses, God bless you. You guys are an amazing breed of people. Because as a trauma nurse, I'm a hard charging, let's do something. And so when I couldn't do something, I just sort of freaked out. And so it was the hospice nurse that pulled me aside, and she goes, I was like, I don't feel well. I don't know what's going on. I just can't. I was feeling really blah, like I was going to throw up or pass out or something. And which is weird because I'm used to seeing like literally blood and guts all day long, brain tissue and like fractured skulls. And she pulled me aside. I'm like, this doesn't even make sense. I just feel so awful. And she pulled me aside. She said, yeah, it makes perfect sense. She said, you're used to always doing something. And now is a time when you need to not do something. Now is a time when you need to let him go with grace. And I literally felt really sick for a second. And then I was like, oh my God, she's right. Like that's just such a hard thing to grasp, letting someone go with grace and with dignity. And that's what hospice nurses do. It was such a weird thing to experience.
So this man that you were disconnected from and held a lot of animosity toward came back, had a better brain, you guys had a better relationship, you're able to heal one of the biggest hurts of anyone's life is their relationship with their father. And the day he died, he asked me to go to Taco Bell and get him an enchilito. And I'm like, no, why am I going to accelerate your death? And
it was so funny. We were like, and your book had just come out,
change your brain, change your body.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh my God, you're going to have to go cloak and dagger. But if I'm on my deathbed, give me what I want. We knew he was dying, so.
So I went and got him an enchilito, and then he died.
So, but I want to talk about that day in the next episode because it was really an amazing day. It was actually a miraculous, beautiful day, which sounds really weird for the day that someone dies. But that day
people who've been around people who died, that doesn't sound weird at all. Stay
with
us.
I need to talk about it. It was so wild.
Stay with us. Welcome back to the Reluctant Healer week. Before we talk about the day your dad died, this is from Blissful Baboon. So true about the relationship between autism and gluten and dairy sensitivity. Radical improvements have been observed when autistic kids are taken off gluten and dairy and given probiotics to help their microbiome. Leaky gut is often the cause of food allergies and subsequent brain dysfunction. So leaky gut should be addressed and treated. Thank you so much for sending that in. We absolutely agree with that.
Yep.
And enchiritos don't help your gut.
Okay, stop. So that is not what happened. So interesting because the hospice physician had come to the house, and he said, oh, he's probably got a couple more weeks. They really thought that my dad was doing fine, and he had at least a couple more weeks, even though he was in hospice. And so his vitals were stable, everything was good. And I want to just credit, a couple, first of all, I've already talked about hospice and how amazing they are. But one of the ministers, because he had been leading Bible study over at a church near us, Mariners Church, and one of the ministers there, Eric Hurd, was a pretty amazing guy. And he came to the house, and because my dad he wanted to talk to a minister, and so Eric Hurd came to the house and spent the day with him. And here's what was interesting. My dad was still having a hard time letting the past go, his guilt. He's still having a hard time letting go of his guilt from the mistakes he had made, mostly with his daughters, right? There's 3 of us, my 2 half-sisters and me. So that he was really having a hard time reconciling this. And so Eric came, and I don't know what happened during these few hours, but whatever happened was really powerful. So when I went in to go see my dad, he was crying, and he was happy, and it really seemed like whatever happened, he really finally had gotten it. And so I sat with him for a little while, and we talked about it. And I once again, reassured him. I'm like, Dad, none of us are carrying that anymore. Like, you don't go with that. Don't go with that thought. We're all fine. We've all let go. We all love you. Like, let it go. And so, and it really, for the first time, seemed like he really had done that. He was just peaceful. He was super peaceful. And then he slipped away. So he supposedly had a couple of weeks, and it was just like the second he let go, he slipped away, and he was just all of a sudden not conscious anymore. He was alive, but he wasn't really conscious. And so he was moaning, and he was not conscious. And it was shortly after the enchilada, as you pointed out. But that was not what did it. I really believe it was because he just had unfinished business, and he had been praying to take care of that, and he was able to take care of it. So the day that he died, he had spent this time with the minister that he had wanted. He was able to let that go. He was in such a peaceful place. The hospice nurse had been so amazing with me and really helping me. And then I was literally sitting in his bed. I was holding him. I was cradling him, and I was praying with him, and you came in and you were holding his hand. And he passed away. And it was just this incredibly peaceful, amazing day. And it sounds so strange for that to happen during someone's death. But there was nothing traumatic about it. It was actually just a great day. So we all knew it was coming. And
so working on healing his brain and subsequently your relationship with him, what kind of legacy or what kind of imprint does that leave on your psyche?
So I'd done a lot of praying about this because I really didn't want to do it. And there's been several situations like that afterwards that we'll talk about another time. So I did a lot of praying about it. And what came to me was the same thing happened with the Salvation Army when we were working with people, a population that was hard for me. When I prayed about that, the same thought had come to me. It's like, why don't you understand? Why don't you trust me? I'm not putting you there. I'm putting you there for your benefit. I'm doing this for your benefit. And what came to me was the help is for them, but the healing is for me. And so I'm like, why is this so? Why do I keep repeating the same dumb mistake when it's happened repeatedly, right? So the help is for them, but the healing is for us. And so sometimes it's really hard. Sometimes we don't want to do these things. But when we give of ourselves in a way that is painful, that is hard, that is, in my mind, what came to me. And there are times I believe we shouldn't do it. I do believe that there are certain boundaries that we have to protect ourselves, to protect our families. But there are other times when we know that we're supposed to be doing something and we don't want to do it. And we don't want to do it because of our own past, our own pain. But when we stretch ourselves, it helps us to bridge those gaps and tear down those walls. And it heals something broken in us. And that's what sort of came to me through all of this process was I am not kidding. And people who know me would not see a scared, broken person. They would see sort of a scary kind of person because that's what I created. to protect myself. It's like there's walls you don't get to get through. And if you try, God help you. But that's my facade, right? But what this did, bridging that and stretching past all of that, it breaks that down. It heals that brokenness.
So let's wrap this for our brain warriors. What would you see as the biggest lessons in this story?
Well, I think I just said it. When you stretch yourself in a way that is hard for you, first of all, protect yourself. Have boundaries that you don't want to ever put your family in harm and in jeopardy. But when you can do that, the help is often for someone else, but the healing is often for you. I think that's the number one lesson. And I think it helps to heal the brokenness.
And that broken relationships are often caused by brain dysfunction.
Mm-hmm.
So there's genetic vulnerabilities, there's
Well, I like our four
toxic
circles.
exposure, that so there's a biological piece
Mm-hmm.
to why relationships are hard. I can't tell you the number of husbands we've seen here where the wife says, I'm leaving you unless you go get evaluated, because the relationship is so hard. They want to know, is there a brain reason? And if there is, would you please fix it? Would you please optimize it? And so often when people do that, their relationships can be better. But it doesn't just heal the psychological imprint on your brain that for you and your dad, even as he got better, you both still had to work through that. It was actually easier for you than for him, which is interesting.
Because when his brain got better, he suddenly was faced with the stuff he did. So he had to deal with that. Because when his brain got better, it was like, oh, whoops, like what happened?
And when your brain's not right, the first person you blame is not yourself, it's other people.
Right. And suddenly he was blaming himself.
'Cause
That
he
was the
had-
first time I had ever seen that.
Because he had more empathy.
Yeah, before that, he was always a victim. So, which just used to irritate me to no end. Like, why are you such, it irritates me when people act like victims anyway, so.
And another lesson, even for things we don't want to do, sometimes they stretch us and change us in a way that helps us be reluctant healers.
Yeah, and I think, maybe we should do a series on daddy issues, because I think what's really interesting is as that relationship healed, I began to see so many things different. I didn't even realize. So, prior to that, I mean, part of it's because my dad was this minister, and so my faith was really sort of affected. Whatever religion you are, if your relationship with your dad is, or whatever you believe in, if your relationship with your dad or your parents or whatever is not right, it can affect how you see the world or how you see your faith or your religion. And it certainly did with me. Because and all of a sudden one day I realized, I woke up and I went, my dad is human. My dad is a man. He's not God. Like it just this sort of awakening. And it's like, why am I blaming God for what my dad did? And it's sort of like helped me, and it broke free all of that baggage. And it also at the same time helped me, I believe, with my relationship with you. So, because I think your intimate relationships are affected by all that negativity and that baggage and what you think. Like, for example, I've said in our other podcasts, I was absolutely convinced that you were manipulative because no one is that nice. Because my template was not set for that. So if you were being that nice, it's because I was waiting for the other shoe to fall, because you had to be wanting something. So.
Well, I did want something.
Yeah, well, okay. But what you wanted was actually a loving relationship.
Right.
Okay, that's okay to want. That's not my template of men in relationships, though. Does that make sense?
So I was really smart in spending time healing your primary relationship with a male, so that you didn't have to bring.
I was always waiting for the other shoe to fall, and always ready to walk out the door.
Our relationship,
Yeah.
and now, what did you say? If The only reason you're going to run is if you're chasing me.
Till death do us part. Let me be clear. Let me be clear.
So we hope this is helpful for you. Relationships are just so important, but they're also complicated.
Yeah.
And if you're really struggling, the first thing, we want you to get your brain right, because when your brain's right, you're more helpful, more thoughtful, more goal-directed. And if the people in your life act badly or troubled, it very well could be the head injury that they had experienced, or it could be the biological depression that they inherited, or it could be an overgrowth of candida, which can cause insomnia, anxiety, and brain fog. And most people aren't thinking about that. We just judge people as you're good, you're bad, you're for me, you're not for me. And it's way more complicated. So brain warriors, they're armed, prepared, and aware to win the fight of their lives.
So true.
Stay with us.
If you're enjoying the Brain Warriors Way podcast, please don't forget to subscribe so you'll always know when there's a new episode. And while you're at it, feel free to give us a review or 5-star rating, as that helps others find the podcast.
If you're interested in coming to Amen Clinics, use the code podcast10 to get a 10% discount on a full evaluation at amenclinics.com. For more information, give us a call at 855-978-1363.